Hello, everyone. Welcome to another conversation from the Diaspora, a Building Africa's Future podcast. Once again, this is your host, your sister, and your friend Nkiru, and I'm joined today by Kweku Essien, he's here from Seso Global. He serves as the Chief Commercial Officer for Seso Global, a blockchain-based prop tech platform. He served as the business analyst for Conros Corporation for 5 years to aid in the development and facilitation of the company's interests and projects in sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Essien also served as the lead coordinator for Giants of Africa in Ghana. Giants of Africa is an organization founded by Toronto Raptors GM Masai Ujiri with the mission to use basketball as a means to educate and enrich the lives of the youth of Africa using basketball as a tool. Mr. Essien graduated from University of Toronto with an honors bachelor's degree, specializing in political science and economics. So, quickly, we just want to say thank you for being here today. And if you would just say a few words of hello to our listeners and our viewers.
Yeah, no, thank you very, very much for the opportunity. And I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you. And welcome to everybody on this call. On this webinar or podcast. And happy to be here. Happy to be here for sure.
Yeah, thanks again, Kweku. I know it's been a long time coming, as we were discussing earlier. So just really briefly, because, as you know, the podcast is centered on the experience of the African diaspora. If you would just, tell our listeners and our viewers where you are from in the African diaspora and where you currently reside.
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Ghana, but lived a long time in Canada, in Toronto. I live mostly in Ghana, but I also frequent Toronto as well.
Awesome. So I guess if you can just start by telling us a little bit more about your diaspora experience, your diaspora story, when you first, came to Canada, because actually you're the first person that I've interviewed on my show that's from Canada. So I would love to kind of hear about the African diaspora experience in Canada.
Yeah, no, awesome. Yeah, so as I said, I was born and raised in Ghana, but for high school, I did about some boarding school for 1 year in Canada in a place called Hamilton, in Canada. And then from there, went to University of Toronto, where I did my bachelor's there for a bit. Great school, nice people in Canada as well. And like I said, Canada is, very much a lot of the stereotypes can be true. Very nice people, very relaxed, and for the most part, it's a place where there's a lot of opportunity here as well to get ahead. But I will say, it's at the end of the day, it's not home. As I was telling you, I was the first time I ever saw snow was in Canada, and I used to think I loved the air conditioning in Ghana. Ghana is a little hot. It's like the air conditioning. So I thought I'd be okay in the cold, but I kind of it's not the same. It's not the same. And I think, like I was telling you, home is home, and the weather does remind you that you're not home at the end of the day. But for the most part, very, very nice place.
That's awesome, Kweku. Thanks so much for sharing that. I mean, I know, I think for many of us, I know we probably discussed it at different points. When I first came here, with my siblings and my parents, it was a different world, like what we're seeing now in terms of like how we grew up, and being an African in the diaspora wasn't as cool or as trending as it is in today's world. I know for many of us, I mean, I don't know, and again, please feel free to kind of tell us a bit more about it. Like with my upbringing, my dad was very like pro Africa, from an early age. He would always tell us about, just African, Africanness in general, both continental Africa as well as, the African diaspora. African diaspora, but specifically African American experience. And so we were taught to like appreciate all of that. And but we were also, very, self-aware of, where we're coming from, our cultural heritage and everything else like that. So I would love to, I guess, to hear from you, like, how was that for you growing up? Like, how involved were you in like maybe learning about your heritage, or like at what point did you start to appreciate, that part of your background?
Yeah, great questions. So, as a youth in Ghana, I'll say for the most part, like most youth, I really just wanted to get out of there, see the world. Especially, go to the United States, you watch a lot of movies, you listen to a lot of music from the States, and that's where you want to be, right? And so I'll say that is probably even still true now with a lot of youth on the continent. But it's a true story for most, right? And I will say, of course, you do find that the grass is not always greener elsewhere. And for me, where that started off was, after school, I worked for a family office, a Kenyan family, who are well-to-do and looking to do a lot more in sub-Saharan Africa, especially in East Africa, Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, in South Africa as well, in different sectors as well, in agriculture, in infrastructure, technology. And I remember our first project was going to be in Rwanda, and so I was set to go to Rwanda myself. And I have to say, I mean, I'm ashamed to say it, but I was very, very skeptical about going to Rwanda. We watched the movie at least about Rwanda, and we've heard the stories, and I just didn't quite understand why we were going here. Right? But they got me to read some books, and I learned a little bit more about country, by understanding the history and also understanding what they were doing there on the continent. And I must say, though, it still didn't quite hit me until I landed there and realized, wow, like they did all of this, 20, 25 years removed from the genocide. They were able to get the country to this level. And I think that's what really sparked it for me, the real love for the continent, going to Rwanda and understanding, the blessings that we do have on the continent, which are actually massive, like plenty. You realize it at a certain point, and
Right.
understanding that, and understanding that a lot of our issues are man-made. It's not some supernatural issues. These are all man-made issues that can be solved by man.
Mm.
And once you go to Rwanda, you very much understand that, because when you think about where they were and where they are now, that literally it
Right.
was man-made issues that got them into the genocide, and it was man-made sort of man-made problem solving, that got them to where they
Mm.
are. And so that for me really sparked, the embrace of the continent, realizing what we really have there.
Yeah, Kweku, I love the fact that you said that, that embracing of the continent and embracing of, what it is that we can do for ourselves. And like you said, a lot of times is the problems that we have as Africans, in many cases, is because of, just a lot of different things, politics, and just us not working together and not, wanting to build together, which is something that's, very unfortunate. But I love the fact that you did address on the fact that, you know, we can provide actionable solutions, I guess, to these issues that we sometimes bring about ourselves. So I guess that leads perfectly into your business. So if you I do have this in the background just for um those who would watch this later, and for those who will be listening later, you can find this on uh Kweku's YouTube channel, which I believe would be Seso Global,
Yes.
and I'll include all of that in the show notes. But Kweku, if you can just, I mean, I guess share, for those who would be watching or who would listen later, tell us a little bit more about what we're seeing in the background, and tell us more about your business.
Yeah, great. And what you're seeing there is actually a Ghana property investment tour that we put together. We put two of them together last year, and are looking to do a lot more of them. And so you can find some of that information. Perhaps I'll send you the link on that. And really, what Seso is, for those in the States, we like to call ourselves the Zillow of Africa. And
Mm.
really, what that means is that we really just want to be an ecosystem player, and really a source for verified property, right? One of the issues on the continent, which has a massive land mass, you can fit United States, Asia, Europe into Africa. I mean, China, you can fit China, the United States, and Europe all into Africa, right? It's that big of a continent. There's that much land, but it's underutilized. And one of the reasons for that, is the fact that there isn't a lot of trust in that sector, right? A lot of people have been scammed. There've been lots of fraud. And we've heard all the stories, right? Even family members defrauding their own family. Like, we've heard all the stories, and that really creates a perception that is very hard to to kill, to stop, right? And it's what's led us to this point where real estate is not really the number one source of wealth for a lot of Africans. It should be. I mean, that's the case all across the world. Real estate is where wealth is created, and we have a lot of it, and we should be utilizing it. And so, really, my once that clicked for me, that's when I really understood that this is the opportunity, right? Because like water and air, you can't live without the land. It's such an obvious thing to say sometimes. It sounds so obvious, but it's so true, right? And so, for what we do at Seso, the simple and short of it for most customers out there, we have 15,000 verified units, worth a combined $3 billion of real estate assets on our platform for any individual who's out there looking to purchase property in Ghana and Nigeria, and shortly in South Africa as well. We are your guys. We can assist you through the whole process, and we work with lawyers, banks, surveyors, property management companies as well, so as to provide you that full suite of options through that transaction, through that life cycle. So yeah, that's like in a nutshell what we do.
Yeah, that's a lot of great information that you just provided, and I think one thing that you touched on, which I know for many of us, as you rightly said, for those of us in the diaspora, there's this very big issue when it comes to trust. As you said, like sometimes it's hard to trust like your relatives. You might have one uncle or one auntie that you gave some money, and somehow when it's time to when you're looking forward to that property or that whatever it was, you go home or you find out that we needed the money for food, or we needed the money for some other issue. And it's very frustrating, and it's very challenging, as you had mentioned, like to really trust in these institutions back home. In many cases they are just family, or somehow some other connections that we have. So I would love to kind of maybe get some more information from you as to how do you build that trust, both with your clients as well as with organizations that you've partnered with. I'm sure it's taken some time. So how did all of that start? Like, how did the conversation start? How did you kind of over time build this, I guess, trust? If you can touch more on that.
Yeah, no, great point. So for us, we wanted to start with on both sides, the low-hanging fruit. So we're a B2B2C business, which is like a business to business to customer business. And so our core clients are, in a lot of senses, real estate developers. And so we decided to target real estate developers who are corporations that have bought up land, done the due diligence on the land, a lot of hard work to ensure it's all good, and have then sort of built up units on there, and hundreds of thousands of units, as you can see on the screen, right, depending on the location. And so it's easier for us to do due diligence on these type of companies, right? It's easier to go check their company registration documents, check the land title documentation, etc., right? To vet it, right, before it's put on the platform. And it's much easier than talking to individuals and trying to figure that out. That's something that we're trying to get to as a company, but we were at least in the early stages, it was not possible. And so we picked that low-hanging fruit. These are people who are looking for diaspora, which I believe are also a low-hanging fruit as well. There's a lot of folks in the diaspora who want to purchase, but are just put off by the whole process, scared, or scarred by past transactions. And so on both sides, we're seeking to create that trust. And so we now have also lawyers on the platform, who you can utilize, or we even ask our clients, you can still use your lawyer, a lawyer, if you want, get a lawyer to sort of check and vet the properties, at the end of the day, because it's better to be safe than sorry. It's a massive transaction. And so even then, within that process, we're bringing lawyers into the conversation to ensure everything is on the up and up and very credible, right? And of course, at the end of the day, it's executing and providing good service. And so, we're getting lots of referrals now, which is great. obviously early on it was much harder to get that up and running. Or referrals show that people like the process that we provided them, and are happy to share with others. And then obviously then it makes it as you work towards getting partners like Echo Bank or Republic Bank. These are big banks in West Africa, who are your partners. It then breeds more credibility, right? So credibility breeds more credibility, and so that's how we've built it over time. And I think it's working out for us well now, and so we're gonna just continue to do that the same way.
I love that, Kweku. I love that. I mean, I think that's just so beautiful, when it comes to, the role that the African diaspora plays, in building, bridging our communities, both, continental Africans and then those who, like you and I who do live in the diaspora, and then, in a greater conversation, African Americans or Afro-Caribbeans and other, Africans in different places in the diaspora who are more, I guess, far removed than we are in terms of, generation and other things that, we're aware of. So I guess talking about that, or maybe getting to that point, can you talk a little bit more about, I guess, the surge of the African diaspora, particularly with African Americans, either moving or considering relocating to Africa, specifically Ghana? If you can talk about, I guess, the year of the return and the Black Panther effect. I know, once that movie came out, so many of us, continental Africans as well as African Americans, so many people were just, it was a movement. And you can, I guess, talk more about that and how that relates to, everything that you're doing, what you've seen, on ground and everything else like that.
Yeah, no, excellent. So really what has happened, especially in Ghana, but it's happening all across the continent as well, is this big shift, this move back to the continent. And it's been trickling over time, and of course it happened, Marcus Garvey sort of asking blacks to go back, but obviously stalled a bit. And what happened with the year of return, I think, was was a pretty extraordinary thing where the government did take some initiative, and really asked, welcomed the diaspora back, right? And it was an initiative that was created actually by an African American. It was a proposal brought forth by an African American. And for those that don't know, the year of return is 400 years since the end of slavery. It was meant to celebrate that occurrence, and it was a way to sort of ask people to come back. And it's been very successful. I must say, Ghana, was not a tourist country until 2019, and then all of a sudden, it's now become, I mean, for me, December has always been fun, but now it's a movie really in a lot of ways. What occurs in Ghana in December, right? And so you're seeing a lot of eyeballs in the country. You're seeing obviously social media and people posting it all over the place. And what that has done now for us it's been very instrumental for our business, especially. And so even that video you saw there, the tour, are all African Americans who've never been to Ghana before, but were willing to join a tour focused on real estate in Ghana, right? And I'll tell you one interesting story. One of our clients, who actually even became an investor in Seso, actually himself, Brooklyn couple, never been to Ghana, sort of never been to Ghana, no family from Ghana, husband is pretty much African American, ancestors were slaves, and then the other lady is from the Caribbean, so they've never been to Ghana before. But the husband, who's very funny, it was like he had no interest in living in Ghana. He was pretty much said -% chance to go live in Ghana, but his wife would watch a lot of YouTube videos, and that's actually how she found us, through some of our YouTube marketing, and just watching Ghana, watching all parts of the continent, but deciding to hone in on Ghana, and learn a lot about it. And they decided, they would come to Ghana for about a week and, check it out and see if, hey, this is the place, they want to be. be at. And the husband, said he went from negative all the way to 90% or so within a week. He decided, hey, they're gonna stay here, and
Nice.
he bought a $300,000 penthouse, and they've been living there ever since. Really, since this past year, and so it's these extraordinary things happening, and there's a lot more of it happening. Folks looking to retire back in the cons because it makes sense in a lot of ways. Obviously, depending on how
Mm,
much money you have, you can buy land, build it yourself, or buy an apartment unit, or buy a standalone by the beach, perhaps, right? But
right.
all of that being said is, and again, I take it back to the gentleman husband. He said, even if they were to go, all his business died down, which it didn't. He could work from home actually, so he's not even fully retired yet. Even if all his business died out, he could live with his savings, eating rice for the rest of his life, because he's bought his home, with cash, and no one is gonna uproot him from his place. He always has a home, right? So your dollar does stretch quite a bit for those looking to retire, and that's actually what has driven a lot of. And I think that's where, right now Ghana is situated as a town, but I think it's going to turn a little bit into what Miami is, which is, or Florida, let me say, is actually, in the sense that parts are party central, but then a lot of Florida is also just retirement central as well. A lot of people looking to retire, and I think that's what's gonna happen to Ghana. I bet it's gonna be a bit of both.
I really love the perspective that you offer because, again, obviously you are on ground. You work closely with these people, and I just think it's beautiful, just in general. And quickly, I don't know how familiar you are with, like, my passions as it relates to the podcast, but I I'm really passionate about the African diaspora in general, but especially for like I mentioned earlier, for African American, or the Afro Caribbean, or the Afro Latino, and these other populations who are a little bit more removed than we are because we are continental Africans, even though we do live in the diaspora currently. Um, I just love when they're able to make these connections, whether it's taking a DNA test, or just maybe choosing a country in Africa, maybe West Africa specifically, or just anywhere, and taking the chance and just going out there, whether it's to just visit, try the food, meet the people, connect, on a more spiritual kind of level, um, you know, learn the language. Like, it just touches me in a different way. I love seeing that, and I love the fact that you are helping to kind of provide that for them, because I think for many people, as you were saying earlier, like, with traveling or retiring, it's one thing to kind of go somewhere and just, okay, I'm just, relaxing, I'm just, whatever. It's another thing to see this place as, what, I've lived my entire life in, this part of the world, or my family for however many generations has been in the US or wherever. Why not, spend, the remaining, parts of my years after I finish, the hustle and, whatever of everyday life, to retire, in Africa. I think that's so beautiful. I mean, so thanks so much for sharing that. And I think, I guess to wrap up that point, how, I guess, from African Americans to another population, are you seeing more of African Americans doing these types of investments, or are you seeing more of continental Africans? Like, who is supporting, or who is, I guess, your biggest maybe customer when it comes to that?
Yeah, I'll say in Ghana, it's a healthy mix between the two. Ghanaian diaspora and the African American cohort. It's a nice mix. In Nigeria, it's more tiered towards Nigerian diaspora, which is a massive diaspora in itself. And I always like to point out this fact that in terms of remittance to the continent, $48 billion goes to the continent every year, and it just keeps going up and up, which shows you the power that the diaspora has in itself. Just sending money back, but as well, half of that goes to Nigeria, right? Which is crazy. 24 billion essentially goes to Nigeria every year, and about 30% goes towards real estate. That's what some of the studies say, right? And next in line is Ghana at 3 billion, which is still substantial, but you can see the gap there. And so Nigeria in itself has a lot of power in its diaspora, right? And I think you see that power being wielded very strongly very soon, because that is very powerful. $24 billion, and to be able to target some of those funds into specific industries, like real estate, but even other things as well. I think once that's able to be harnessed very well, I think Nigeria is ready to skyrocket, because a lot of the issues on the continent is also financing. Financing anything, people are very wary of investing in the continent because of perception issues, and that's not even outsiders, even the people, sort of our own people as well, and that's for various reasons, right and wrong, right? But that's what's slowing things down, and at the end of the day, I do understand the perception, but I think it's time to maybe let go of some of that. At least things have changed since the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years on the continent, and I do quite understand some of our forefathers, and etc., who left or had to leave for various reasons. It makes a lot of sense, but I think now is a much better time than it was in the past to bring that expertise and capital that you've accrued back there and utilize it to create wealth on the continent.
Wow, Kweku. I mean, there's just so many things that you've said. Like you touched on, I mean, I know you didn't say it specifically, but that brain drain and potential brain gain. As more of us, go back home and share our expertise and our everything that we've learned, and with the opportunities that we've been given in a diaspora and everything else like that. You also talked about trust again, which again is a very big issue. And I think, like, even with elections, I was thinking about this, like, as you are probably aware, Nigeria recently had a election, and it's like things that are so simple or that we take for granted, in the countries that we reside in. These things are like pretty much catastrophic in our homelands, and it's so unfortunate how something that should be as simple as that, we end up like going to like fasting and praying just to make sure that it's, I don't know. That's another story I know we're not really prepared for today, but I just love the fact that you touched on, the fact that we, as, those of us in the African diaspora, there's so much that we can do, and there's so much that we have been doing, with that remittance economy. And I guess, I mean, I don't know if you have a lot of information on this. I know you did say that a good amount of it goes towards real estate, but can you share some more about where else the remittance is going to, like how else is helping our people back home?
Yeah, it's simply usually school fees, health, and food. Food is probably like a big one, and so it's typically for those aspects. People send money. The family needs something for, all right,
Right.
and so that's typically been the spread. I don't know what the exact percentages are. I looked at mostly real estate, as you can imagine. Real estate
Yeah.
about 30%, right? But yeah, the rest of the money does go towards those places: school fees, food, health, etc. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. I mean, I know that I guess, touched on this briefly, maybe in our earlier chat, or or even today, but I would say, I've with social media, as we've seen, it's really helped a lot as it relates to communicating information, conveying the beauty of Africa, both to us as Africans as well as to everyone else. I think, again, kind of going back to our childhood and, being an immigrant in these these systems that we find ourselves in, at an early age is not, well, first of all, when you're a child, it's not easy to, you're still discovering who you are. A lot of who you are is based on what your parents are telling you, and sometimes they have their way of thinking and operating that,
Mhm.
so that's,
Yeah.
but I think, as we of course grow up into ourselves, mature, go to school or just interact with different people, and then also just in general, I think the significant role that social media has played in kind of influencing, as we hear about social media influencers and everything else like that. There's quite a few people that I follow. I'm Nigerian, so I follow a lot of like people who are doing great work in Nigeria, specifically, like kind of like with you, like with real estate back home, how to find properties, how to navigate life back home, how to, if you want to relocate. It's something I've been kind of thinking about. Not that I'm like thinking about doing it tomorrow or today or tomorrow or anything like that, but in the long term, I would love to. I think many of us too, like even our parents and our our families, many of them who come over here, to the diaspora, most of them are not thinking that this is where they want to stay forever. Ultimately, they would love to go back home, but for many reasons that we've discussed, today and just in general that we are aware of, is not always the best or the safest option at the moment. But, it's always inspiring for me personally just to kind of see, the content that people are producing, like, with the video that we have in the background, with the property tour, and like I said, some other people that I follow who have been doing the work, who've taken on those risks to kind of go back home and really develop a lot of these things from scratch. And again, I hate to say that it's unfortunate that it takes, us kind of coming back home to kind of get these things going, just because, again, things back home are not always the way that they need to be. But I would just kind of love to, maybe you can tell us a little bit more why real estate. Tell us more about why real estate is like powerful, how you've seen its growth, and if you can tell us a little bit more about how the future might look in terms of real estate in Africa.
Yeah, no, great points. And, I'll even just touch before I talk about the real estate, I'll touch on the social media angle you pointed out, which is very, very interesting to me, right? And I watch a lot of YouTube, especially these days. And, a lot of the big YouTubers, Wadi Maya, Vanessa Camby, Jasmine Ahmad, these are very famous names on YouTube who showcase life on the continent. You're in a different light. And I think that has been very, very important, very crucial, not just for my business, but I think for the continent as a whole. It's been extremely important, and you find that even with the year of return, I was just chatting with someone about this. It really blew up when there were some African American celebrities that came in 2018, as like a pre-year of return, filmed a lot of it. Put it on their social media, and it ends up on the Shade Room. I don't know if you know the Shade Room, but it ends up there and other blogs or Instagram pages, and then from there it blows up because people see it and are just confused and are wowed by it because they can't really understand, because and it's the same for a lot of people. What you've seen and you in the past, you almost believe it's today, it's what's happening today, it's in the present. What was true back then, and I'm sure it might have been true back then, but maybe or maybe not, but it's not true today. The continent is not ravaged by war and disease. It's very cosmopolitan. There are a lot of very educated individuals, across the continent, and there are a lot of peaceful people across the continent as well. And what I like about when people come to Ghana is that's one of the things it really attracts them to the continent. The fact that they can go partying till whenever, walk out on the streets, whatever, and relatively there's very little, at least violent crime. Let me say, especially in Ghana, right? And so these are some of the things that I think are important to showcase. And in terms of how that's attached itself to real estate, I'm now these days involved in some very, very interesting conversations with various different types of individuals, both local in the diaspora, celebrities, bankers, real estate folks, who are all looking at different types of opportunity, different ways to invest in real estate, whether that be through a fund that they've created to finance the construction of developments, creating a syndication pool where people can put in, a minimum of $10,000 to invest in developments, buying up units, studio apartments for $75,000, $80,000, $90,000, and then working with a property management company to rent it out, buying a home to retire in as well. And then even individuals coming in. I'm working with a group, a gentleman, actually, an African American as well, from Chicago. Again, no relation to Ghana, but although I will say he did just marry a Ghanaian last year. But he has decided to develop a 300-acre beachfront development in Ghana, right? So a master plan, massive community. And what's very interesting is that he's not the only one doing this. There's another gentleman who's Ghanaian background, but has been an architect in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, for a long time. This is doing the exact same thing, a 300-acre beachfront estate in Ghana, right? And they're both an hour away from Accra, although east and west. right? And so you find that there are various ideas happening, there are communities being created, and this is what real estate will provide. And what obviously our task is to help drum up that demand, to ensure that people sort of purchase these units. But I think organically that demand is being created even outside of me, right? And then that's what is very powerful about social media, about what we did with the year of return, and also just I think just it sort of clicked with a lot of people as well. Perhaps Black Panther did it. Perhaps it's watching more documentaries or watching YouTube, and all of these things. But it's something that sort of clicked almost at the same time from various places. Obviously, some of it is also the racial tension, that also occurs, in some of these countries, and I think it all just clicked at one point. A lot of people have decided that if they can, they're going to try and find their way to the continent and to Ghana, right? And so I think that's what's happened organically.
Yeah, I love that. That's very powerful. And I think, just to kind of summarize their last point, I think it's just the importance of being able to tell your story. Because again, for so long, many of us, from the continent, as well as, let's say specifically maybe the African American, for example, you're showed one narrative of what an African looks like or what Africa looks like, and that can have lots of negative things in the person's mind, because again, we already know the role of media. It's a very powerful tool, and given the right or the wrong hands, it can really influence a person to think either in a good way or a bad way. So I think I'm happy that we're in a place where we are able to come on camera and just talk about our experiences, document our experiences in real time. Again, social media, live videos, again, as we saw during the pandemic, and lots of things that were happening in the world, specifically in the U.S., as we're aware of, George Floyd and everything else that happens in this country, and just in general all over the world. We're able to see these things in real time, and I think, as Africans, as continental Africans, I love the fact that we're able to also share our own stories and shed light on the positive things coming out of Africa through us, and through those of us who are on the continent currently, and everything else like that. So, Kweku, just to kind of wrap up a little bit, I would love for you to maybe talk a little bit about safety in Africa, like how people can prepare. Or I know, of course, anywhere you go in the world, there's always going to be some level of danger depending on where you are. And I think it's just so funny, because I know whenever I would travel, people will always tell me, "Oh, be careful. This place is whatever." And it's like, when I got to those places, I never felt safer in my life. Like, it was a great place to be. So I would love to kind of hear from you, like how people can prepare themselves, or to maybe challenge that way of thinking and have a good time when they go back to Africa, or when they go to Africa for the first time.
Yeah, so very good perspective. So I've traveled to a lot of African countries when I think about it now. I've been to Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda. And they all have their own sort of little beautiful things about them as well. And I'll say, relatively sort of, obviously, I've never been through anything myself. But in terms of crime, in terms of looking at some places where there is a little bit of crime there, obviously South Africa has had its issues as well with some violent crime, and then Kenya there's a bit more, maybe sometimes theft within those areas, and so you should watch out for that. But I'll tell you this: in Ghana and in Nigeria, for the most part, I think safest places in the world. I'll put that out there for everyone. These are two of the safest places in the world. And so, like we all like to say, Africa is a massive continent. There are various different things happening in various different places. And so definitely good to sort of make sure that perhaps if you can, someone there, so that they can guide you to basically avoid the bad neighborhoods, because like everywhere else, there are some bad neighborhoods that you should avoid, so that you don't sort of put yourself in a bad position. But it's obviously, and I like the question because it almost challenges me in a way, because obviously I'm trying to say that Africa and Ghana in general is quite safe in general, and so please don't take obviously the media propaganda to really stop you from coming to the continent because you're afraid of wars or anything crazy happening to you. I'll say, to a point that in a lot of ways, and I've been told this myself by African Americans, they feel much safer. And this is coming from an African American themselves. Telling me that, she felt safer. She says, I think what she told me was, hey, this club basically feels like, I forget which city actually, because I don't want to be wrong which city it is now, but feels like an African American city I'm from, right? But much, much safer. I think it was New Orleans, she said. It feels much, much safer. The food is the same, vibes are the same, music is great. Similar to what I would get in New Orleans, but the main difference is at the end of the night there aren't shootings or whatnot. And these were her words, right? Not even mine, right? And so it does tell you that it really depends on where you go to, and things can be very, very simple there. But obviously, certain places are a bit more. You should obviously be a bit more careful than not in certain locations.
Yeah, thanks, Kweku, for kind of like giving us that. And I guess I have maybe two more questions, and then I'll kind of give you a chance to like share a little bit more about how people can reach
Yeah.
you. But if you can, let's say I'm just hearing about your company for the first time, and I've been thinking about real estate in Africa, or just want to know how that process looks like. Could you maybe walk us through, walk the listeners, excuse me, and the viewers through like how that would look like, what steps it would take to save money or put money together, or how does that look like for someone who's starting the process?
Yeah, no, great question. Of course, first process is visit our website at www.seso.global. You can go there. We have lots of listings there, and you can find what you need there. And through the website, you can obviously make a request, and we'll reach out to you within 24 hours. And basically walk you through the process, right? And so at times individuals want to do a virtual tour, or what typically happens is that we send them a lot of brochures and information on the different properties ahead of time, that they can review that and get on a call with them, understand what they're looking out for, what their goals are, what their budget is, and then what locations they're looking for. And then from there, once we find a place, and we'll do some virtual tours if you are away from town. If you want to we can also wait for you to come into town as well and look at the units, of course. Essentially, we'll just run you through the process of visiting the properties, and then from there, once you're okay with it, you've done all your checks, ready to pay. It'd be good to always do some due diligence on the property, check the land documentation, check if the land is in court, etc., so that everything is on the up and up. Once you're okay with that, I'll say the mortgage market on the continent is not great. It's something we're actively working on. We've got some partner banks who are putting out some diaspora products, although typically diaspora means to the banks Ghanaian and Nigerian diaspora, and so that's typically what it means. Although we are working on solutions for African Americans and the wider diaspora as well. But there are also payment plan options where you can pay over usually 2 or 3 years. That's usually the average. You can pay for the property over 2 or 3 years, right? So it helps you with that extension. And so that's typically the process for it. Of course, we can connect you with lawyers, property management companies, banks as well throughout that process where it's necessary and where needed, and a property management company to help you manage it as well. And so that's typically the process for purchasing a property.
Awesome. Now, Kweku, I will tell you, I am known for my 2-part questions, sometimes 3-part questions. So I know that I said this is probably the last question, but it has several legs to it. So the first part of the question is, which I know obviously we can't predict the future, and I think you did touch on it a little bit earlier, but how does the future look in terms of like, long term, maybe let's say 10, 15, 20 years? Do you see more continental Africans moving back home, as well as African diaspora people, resettling to the continent, whether it's for maybe like some people who might do like a half a year, like maybe 6 months or more, going back and forth, or like a full-time moving? And I guess the second part to that question is, for those who have moved already, like let's say African Americans, for example, how are their experiences? I know you obviously you don't know everyone, but how would you say their experiences are so far in terms of like relating with the everyday continental African?
Yeah, no, great question. So, what I see in the future in terms of, and I think you're exactly right, it's going to be that mix. So, what COVID did in a lot of ways, obviously, COVID was terrible, terrible, but in a lot of ways as well, what it did is it opened our eyes to a certain type of future where people are, working from home a lot more. Not every job, some jobs obviously require you to be on the ground, and maybe it's good to be, in an office from time to time for cohesion, etc., meet each other. But there are a lot of jobs that can be done, virtually. And what that did, really was, a lot of people actually lived in Ghana, during that time. They would come for vacation in December and then stay for 6 months, during COVID, right? That happened quite a bit, right? And I think really the climate is a big part of it as well. Let's be very honest. It's a very, very big part of it. And that's why I say we are blessed in a lot of ways to have sun all year round. And you find that there are jurisdictions, like Bali, etc., places like that in the Caribbean, who are, allowing people to work from home and even creating visa programs for these type of people. I think that's part of what the continent should also latch on. Where people can get, visas to, work from home in Ghana, right? Like extended visas. I think that would be something that would be very, very beneficial to a lot of countries on the continent. I also believe what's going to happen, and I already touched on retirement. I think that's going to be the biggest one, the biggest influx of people who actually stay for a long period of time is those who are looking to retire. Because, folks who have saved, let's say, 250,000 to $1 million in their bank account, for the most part, or can afford some type of unit and can have enough cash to, especially if they're getting, pension payments and whatnot, can live off that for a good period of time in Ghana. The dollar is much stronger than the city for sure, right? And I think that will be the most realistic push to the continent. Those two groups of folks who are individuals who can work from home, and then people who are looking to retire. I think what will likely more happen with, let's say, middle-aged folks is a lot of the investment units. So people investing in units that can be put up for Airbnb. And I'll note to you that actually Ghana is the number one fastest growing country on Airbnb, and I was told this by folks from Airbnb. Nigeria is number 3 actually as well, or top 5.
Wow.
And so that shows you that there's a massive influx of people coming in during their vacation periods to Ghana, right? And it'll start spreading a lot more throughout the year, especially the summers. I think that the summers are not looked at as much, but the summers will also become quite big in the continent as a destination for a vacation. And that will grow the Airbnb short-term rentals, and so that will then spur more people to purchase investment units, right? That they can sort of put up for Airbnb, and so that's where I see it. In the, say, short to medium term, I think that's where it's going to shift towards those 3 angles. And then what I hope for in the long term is that is that brain gain, and so. Those folks who start working from home and are living in Ghana, Nigeria, wherever, or the retirees, etc., right? Or even people who've invested in the continent, right? Now you all have a vested interest in the country. And what that does is now you're going to put your brain power and your capital to use because you are in that particular country. And that's really what happens. I like to always point the story I heard about the president of Rwanda, and his early days when he realized that if he didn't have a fancy hotel, no one was going to come to his country. And if no one comes to his country, no one is going to invest. And he did a lot trying to get money in from, all the various organizations. But they all told him buying a hotel is a waste of money. You have bigger issues, out there. It's a waste of money. But he decided to build the hotel himself. They built the hotel as a government, and they sold it off for a profit very recently as well. And, that was the best hotel in the country for a period of time. Now it's probably the 4th best, right? There are better hotels that have come in after the fact. And the thing is that and it's a great hotel, I've stayed there as well, the Serena. But if he hadn't built that, people wouldn't come there. And if they don't come there, they have no feeling towards the place. You can talk and talk and talk about it to someone in their face, but until they land there, very hard to speak the same language about the place, right? Because it's about touching and feeling it and sort of talking to the people as well, understanding it. And so I think what will happen long term, though, if obviously we can execute this first part very well, is that there'll be a big brain gain into the country, more resources, and folks in there, people willing to invest their time and money to grow their countries that they're in. And I think that's really what's going to happen over that period of time, right? And sorry, I don't remember the other questions, but I think yeah, sorry, I was going on.
No worries.
I had a point to make, but I forget it now. Sorry.
No, Kweku, you did an excellent job. I guess just really quickly, the second part of my question was, so far, from your experience, and I know kind of was talking to people on ground, how have the interactions been, like with African Americans, for example, with those on the continent? Like, how are they getting along well? Like, how does that look like?
That's a good point. And that's also a socio-economic, can be a socio-economic problem, if there isn't a good mix as well. Because although we are all brothers and sisters, we have been, torn apart for the most part. And are now sort of, we see a lot of the similarities with each other. But of course, at times as well, there are differences with the way in which, we're brought up, we think about the world, etc. But I think for the most part, it's meshing quite well. What you find is, and obviously it might also depend on country to country. Maybe Ghanaians are just more agreeable people as well. Most, right? And so like to joke around any issue. Right. But for the most part, I think it's what I usually hear. Obviously, the common things, why is the food taking so long? Why are there potholes? Those are the common things I hear. I think, I will say this though, and of course, sometimes there's some bribery issues and whatnot. Although I think sometimes they like that. I'm not going to lie to you. They like that they can just pay for something, fast track it, and move forward. I pay you on this month, something for the boys.
Right.
But I think what we have to look like really strongly at, though, is not to create two different classes of people, right? And I think that will be that's why it needs to be executed right. Because at the end of the day, yes, let's say, even I personally, I'm envisioning or would like to see, in the medium term is, you're creating some great developments where diasporans can come live there, invest, etc. But what I want that needs to do is create jobs in and around it, right? Which of course then locals can then also gain an income where they can rent or begin to sort of build or buy their own more affordable homes, which is usually the issue. Like, what is really affordable? And at the end of the day, people need to make money to a certain level, because how cheap can you make a home is the question usually, or a good home, let me say, right? And the cheapest I've found a good enough home is about $35,000-$40,000, right? And that's still not very cheap for a lot of people at all, right? A lot of people in Ghana, 50% cannot afford that today, right? And so what you will need to do is create jobs in and around it. And so people buy more real estate, living in Ghana will create organically jobs. And then from there, it's about creating real industry, right? And I think that's still diaspora, right? And so, whether it's investing in building a plant, doing something tech related, even getting into politics, whatever it is, if you are there to then serve the country, then it helps. So what you're hoping for is you're getting some good people with, good in their heart to invest in Ghana, to live there, and then to then sort of, try and even selfishly for their own benefit, try and get the country to a much higher level as well. And what you hope that does is it creates also the elevation of the locals as well, so that there are not two different classes. Because definitely what you don't want is two different classes of people where you can where you hear an accent or whatever, you almost then assume that this person has a lot more money than you do, right? And that's what you don't want, right? And so I think that's what we have to look out for. Yeah.
Man, Kweku, I mean, I think this was like a very powerful conversation. Like, you've shared so much insight that I didn't even think about, like even that last point about being careful about not creating, different classes of
Yeah.
people. Because I know, again, even for those of us, like when we go back home, I mean, I don't know if it's the same for you, but like for me, obviously, my accent doesn't sound too much like, I've been here. I came here when I was a kid, when I was 4. So I've been here for a long time now. So going back home, my experience and the way I might interact with people back home, they would probably still treat me very much American. So I know it'll definitely be worse for those who, So yeah, I mean, that's powerful. I love that. And I would love to, really continue this conversation, at a different point as you, get more research and as you kind of continue doing what you're doing. And I just want to give you kudos for what you're doing. I think it's amazing. Like I've told you before. And I know as we're wrapping up now, could you just kind of, I guess, tell, our listeners and our viewers, how they can connect with you? I know you told us about what the next steps would be as far as like, going to your website and everything. But if you can just maybe leave us with a few maybe words of wisdom or anything that you might want to say, and then how they can connect.
Yeah, I don't know how much wisdom I have. I'll try. I'll try. But no, thank you very, very much for this opportunity, and thank you to your audience as well for listening. For me, it was almost like an epiphany that just told me that really at the end of the day, you're supposed to be in Ghana in particular. You're supposed to be in the continent as a whole, and it's I'm very happy that I finally really got to see the beauty of it. I did I had a great childhood, and you forget that sometimes while yearning for something else. You sometimes forget what's out there for you, and certainly the continent has a lot of issues. Let's be very real, but those are all opportunities as well. Each and every issue there, and so for me, and to you all, obviously I am very focused on real estate. There are a lot of different sectors there, but I think real estate is the core issue, and I will say that every day. Once you solve that issue of land, I think you pretty much solve pretty much all issues, right? Once people are able to utilize their land efficiently, it creates wealth, and it also creates a certain level of order that allows people to do what they need to do. I'll give one example of this, which people don't even think about, but one of our investors, a Japanese individual, in his previous job, he was working for a manufacturing company that was looking to set up a plant in Ghana. It took him 2 years to find land. That's because he would go find land and he realizes it's in court, or he would find land and there'd be some legal issue. And so it took him 2 years to find land. And I'm actually not even sure if they even went through the project, right? After 2 years, people get tired, they get over it, they don't want to continue, right? And so that is what creates this perception over time, where then maybe 10 years from now, that the same investor might want to do it again. They might want to create a plant, and he might say, forget about it. I tried this 2 years ago, it was too much work, and so I'm not going to do it again. And so we want to change that narrative and that perception through real estate. And I think once you solve that aspect, I think we solve a lot of issues. So you can obviously, the website is right there. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can find my name there. You can find me on LinkedIn, or info@seso.global as well. You can find us through there. Again, really thank you very much for the time, and looking forward to seeing any of you in Ghana maybe at some point, or in some other African countries. So cheers.
Thank you so much, Kweku. And I don't know if you are comfortable signing us off in your language. What language do you speak? What's your native tongue?
I speak Tree.
Okay. Well, can you sign us off in Tree?
Okay. Midawa super and mehubio, man. Bye.
Okay, and to say, thank you, Kweku.